Yeah, thanks. I'm Titus. I haven't actually spoken at this meetup before. I've spoken at the previous 2 iterations of test automation meetups in Austin, but not this one. If you haven't met me before, I come from an SDET background. I worked at 5 different companies here in Austin before joining Sauce Labs. And while I was working at those companies, I got involved in open source community. So kind of got in with Brett Petticore's crowd here locally with Watir. And as part of that, I started doing development for Watir, and then started doing development for Selenium. Essentially, the guy that wrote the Ruby Selenium code decided to go be a journalist. And the Watir developers are like, how about we just take over the Selenium development as well? And they said, sure. And so now we're doing that. Also want to point out, I am on the browser tools working group for the W3C, helping to create the WebDriver specification. And so I'm pretty well versed in that as well. And I'll talk about this really quickly. Let's see how far we get on these topics that I put together. Let's start off with a quick overview of Selenium 4. So Simon Stewart, creator of WebDriver, project lead for Selenium. In Java, the goal is just change the version number, recompile, and you're done. But of course, there are caveats because there are always caveats. I think the biggest thing that I've seen that's not, so there's 2 main non-backward compatible things in Java specifically. First one is they've been doing new things with HTTP client implementations. And so I think in Java, the right way to do a lot of these things is with system properties. But then I've seen a lot of people work with these specific classes to do specific things. There's a lot of stuff on Stack Overflow working with these. If you've done anything with Apache HTTP, then you can't upgrade past 3.1.4.1. And I've had some clients at Sauce Labs that have run into that issue where they can't upgrade past that. Then we did a temporary thing with OK HTTP, and now we're on to Netty and Reactor client for Selenium 4. The other thing to keep in mind is there are a couple things that, well, yeah, I'll get into it. There are a couple things that you need to make sure that you've done in Selenium 3 in order to just use Selenium 4. So a lot of the Selenium 4 articles that you read, if you're going to go like, here, what's new in Selenium 4? A lot of them end up talking about the W3C WebDriver specification. And so part of it, any talk about Selenium 4 really needs to be, what's the difference between Selenium 4? What is this W3C thing? What's going on? It's important to realize that everything that was in the WebDriver standard, the specification, when it was initially recommended a couple years ago, is in Selenium 3. You get that with Selenium 1.4.1.5.9, all of that stuff. And so a lot of the, here's what's new in Selenium 4. A lot of that is actually already in Selenium 3. So let's talk about what's there and what's not there. First of all, what is this WebDriver specification? Here's the page with all of the homepage for the draft, the latest information. Realize that back in the old days, the Selenium developers themselves were the ones that wrote the drivers. Or before Selenium, it was the WebDriver developers that wrote the driver. So all of the browser drivers written by Selenium developers, which means none of them were really all that great. And then the browser vendors, a couple of them jumped in, Opera and Google said, oh, let's write ours for this. The problem is that everyone had different things they were doing and no one really wanted to create their own. So we had this idea that we would have a standardization of the syntax and the values and what everything needed to look like, what the endpoints would be, what the responses would be, so we could all agree on what's the right thing to do, and let's all do it that way. It used to, like, there were all sorts of little things where Google would do it, sorry, Chrome would do it one way, Firefox would do it another, and the goal was everyone does it the same, and there's ways to toggle it if you want something different, and beyond that, you can file a bug if it's not doing what it's supposed to do. So when we started doing the W3C, it was right around the time we released Selenium 3. We started adding classes for this W3C protocol, different capabilities, different things we're working with. And Mozilla decided that their Gecko driver was only going to support Selenium or W3C protocol. It wasn't going to work with JSON wire protocol at all. And so it was kind of this, Mozilla would say, oh, we need this feature. And so they would put something in their driver, and then they would add it to the W3C, and then Selenium would add support for it. And then Selenium would say, well, we need this. And then the W3C would say, we agree, that's the right thing to have. And then Mozilla would update their driver. So it was kind of a collaborative chicken egg approach for a while. And the thing to keep in mind with Selenium 3 is we have this handshake code. So let's take a look. This is what it looks like when I start a session in, this is Ruby specifically here, Selenium WebDriver for Chrome. It's posting to a session. It's posting session to a specific URL. This is localhost. That's the Chrome driver port to the session endpoint, and it's pasting all of this stuff. And then it's getting, like line 4 there, it's getting the value back. So what are we looking at here? The handshake code means that we are setting both desired capabilities, which is the old protocol, and we're setting capabilities, which is the new protocol. So we're sending both, and whatever the driver recognizes, if the driver recognizes W3C, it's going to come back and say, ah, yes, W3C, let's speak that language. If it doesn't recognize W3C, it's just going to ignore it, going to reply with JSON wire protocol, and Selenium's going to be like, okay, we're going to use that old dialect from now on. There are a couple little gotchas here and there with some of this stuff, but by and large, Selenium has tried to make it completely backward compatible so that the classes that you're writing send it off and the right things get figured out. All of the browsers now default to using W3C protocol. Chrome is actually the last to switch over to default to W3C, and that was done, I think, Chrome 74 or 75. So it's been a while for that as well. This slide's about a year old, but essentially, Jim Evans put together this complicated setup to run all of the tests and do this crunching of how compatible the different browsers were to the W3C specification. The key column here is this pass rate. And I just want to point out that Safari is lagging behind a little bit. So there are things in Safari that you just can't test because the driver won't let you. So it's not your test code. It's not that it doesn't work in the browser. It's that the driver struggles to provide the functionality that you need in order to evaluate that. And they've gotten a lot better. There's work that's been done on a lot of these things, but realize the rest of the browser vendors have done a pretty good job getting this figured out. And Safari is still a little bit behind. All right, so W3C. There are 10 allowed capabilities for W3C. And that's it. These are all that's allowed at the top level. Browser name, browser version, platform name. These are essentially things that limit what driver to get. These are useful for the grid or for Sauce Labs or Browser Stack. These are the things that those servers need to know in order to give the right session back. Because essentially, you need to know what endpoint you're pointing to. If you're pointing to a grid, these things matter. If you're pointing to a Chrome driver, then it doesn't really, like, why would you send a browser name of Firefox to the Chrome driver? You wouldn't, and so it doesn't really make sense. Other interesting things here, page load strategy. So it used to be that some browsers would return control to the user's code right away. Some would wait until it was interactive, and some it would be complete. Now, by default, it's complete. You don't need to send a document ready state execute script command. If you're still doing that, you don't need to do that. It's going to wait by default until it's complete. And then if you want to do something faster, you can set it to give you control at the interactive level. Or if you just want, I'm going to handle all of the synchronization myself on my own code, you can set it to none, and it'll give you control immediately before anything on the page has had time to load, like milliseconds. Timeouts, this is another cool one. The old JSON wire protocol only had a timeouts endpoint, and so you would have to hit the endpoint with things. Now with the W3C spec, you can put that in your capabilities at the beginning. And this is great because I hate seeing timeout commands changing the values of these timeouts throughout tests. And I see a lot of people's tests when I'm looking at my Sauce Labs console, and I can see what commands people are sending. Every time a client uses timeouts and is changing them throughout, I'm like, bad idea. Set it once at the beginning. Now you can do it in the capabilities. You set it then, and you don't touch it. You want an implicit wait, put a small value, don't mess with it. Same thing with page loads and script timeouts. You shouldn't need to do things with that. JavaScript Alerts. So this is one of the ones that was different behavior between what Chrome would do and what Firefox would do. So this has to do with when a JavaScript alert pops up in the page. Selenium would force you to make a command to the alert before you can do anything else. So if you get an alert that pops up on the page and you try and get the title of the browser, it's going to fail. It's going to raise an exception saying there's an unhandled alert on the page. You can't do that. Chrome, if you made that call, would raise the exception, but leave the alert up there. So essentially I could, in a framework, I could say, is there an alert on the page? And it would come back yes, because I would rescue the error. It would be yes. And then I could do something with the alert if I wanted. In Firefox, though, it would raise the exception and then it would close the alert. So I couldn't ask, because as soon as I asked, I could no longer interact with the alert. So I had to know exactly where it was. So now you can decide what the default behavior is. If you don't care about your alerts and you just want to accept every single alert that pops up, you can do that. If you want to dismiss every single alert that pops up, well, one, it needs to be an alert that has a cancel button on it, but you can do that without getting any errors. So the notify is essentially Selenium throwing an exception saying you try to do something that's not working with an alert. So this is kind of cool where you can specify the behavior you want. And I really like my favorite is actually ignore. Like, yeah, let me know, but let me deal with it. So those are like the 3 interesting things in the 10. So what about all of the things that you want to set in Chrome or in Firefox or on BrowserStack or on Sauce Labs? All of these things have additional configurations that need to be set at the beginning of a session, capabilities custom to the vendor. So they have this prefix : keyword that will store all of the key value pairs that you want to set for your capabilities. And so, for instance, for Chrome options, this is going to be Goog for Google, : Chrome options. For Internet Explorer, since the Internet Explorer driver is still maintained by the Selenium project, it's SE : I think it's IE options, whatever it is, it's the vendor : whatever, sauce : options. And I am not going to go through each of these, but each of the browsers have their own capabilities with a whole bunch of things. Chrome just has hundreds and hundreds of things that you can do with it. Safari only lists a handful. And then, Sauce Labs, we have dozens of different custom parameters for specific Sauce Labs timeouts or artifact handling or job information updates and things. All right, so that's kind of W3C things. So I talked about Selenium 4 versus Selenium versus W3C. What is the difference here? Realize that it's been a couple years since Selenium released 3.14159. We've been working on Selenium 4 for over 2 years now. And a number of things have changed in both the browser world and on the specification that you can't work with those things in Selenium 3 right now. So things have been added to Selenium 4 just because we're updating with what's changed in the world. That means there's an endpoint for a new window command. There is Safari Technology Preview, keeps changing the name you need to pass it in for the browser. It used to be Safari, then it was Safari Technology Preview, then Safari, now back to Safari Technology Preview. Whatever it is, it has to be, we have to update that in Java right now. I think that's the only one that it doesn't work in the latest version of Selenium, because they were on the ball and updated it, and then that went bad again. And then the new Microsoft Edge, which is now based on Chromium. Again, the name of the browser is different. So I'm talking specifically about the class names that are available. You can construct your own mutable capabilities instance that will do all of these things for Safari Technology Preview and Microsoft Edge. But if you're looking to use the classes, that won't be supported until Selenium 4. Firefox now supports full page screenshots with a custom endpoint. So that'll be available in Selenium 4. And then print PDF, which we're still working on implementing, is also another endpoint that we'll have access to in Selenium 4. And new command window code for it. You can do it by a separate window, or You can pass in here the window type tab instead of window. And hey, look, it's a new tab. So that's kind of cool. And this is showing the edge options. Like I was saying, like if you pass in, so I'm using Sauce Labs for this, but the edge options, if you're just using edge options and you're trying to exclude disable pop-up blocking, this is not going to work in Selenium 3. This code will work in Selenium 4. And this is the kind of interesting thing that you might not know about. By default, if you, a user, goes to Chrome and goes to a page with pop-ups, Chrome will block them. By default, it passes a switch when you're using Selenium, when you're starting the driver by default adds a switch saying not to disable pop-ups, not to disable the pop-up blocker. So by default in your automation, you will get pop-ups. And so this is showing default Chrome behavior for an automated session is you see the pop-ups. Well, you can pass in that code to disable pop-ups and it works. But in Selenium 3, you pass in that line of code. It doesn't work, you still get the pop-ups, and then you run the same code in Selenium 4, and sure enough, the pop-ups go away. So that's just kind of an interesting way of showing that, as well as an interesting thing that you might not realize about default Chrome behavior. And just to look at that code again, you would pass in exclude switches because disable pop-up blocking is something Chrome driver adds by default when starting a Chrome browser session. So you can exclude the switches for that in order to automatically block pop-ups in your tests. And full page screenshot, this is pretty straightforward. You can either get a screenshot or you can get the full page screenshot that shows all the things. All right, so those are just kind of the basic updates. Just they're new because things have changed in the last 2 years and we now support new things. New features, major things here. You do not care about the build system that we're using behind the scenes to create all of the jars and gems and artifacts. Selenium developers do. If you're interested in working on Selenium and writing code for Selenium, this is going to matter because right now it's a really big pain to get up. There's a high barrier to entry to starting to work with Selenium in general. It just, you have to learn a whole new build system. There's a lot of things that you have to do. Most of us coming from a test background aren't working with enterprise level code base that has these complicated moving parts and build systems. It's all command line generated. We just want our IDE and our scripting languages and right click and run and everything just works. It's not really how Selenium is designed, but we're trying to make that easier. And Bazel, which is a cross-platform build tool from Microsoft, is going to help with that. There are a bunch of changes to Selenium Server and Selenium Grid. They've done a pretty major overhaul with that. And I'm not going to cover that too much in my talks, mostly because I spend most of my time talking about what's new in Selenium with Sauce Labs clients, and most of the Grid stuff doesn't really apply to my clients. And so there are changes. They've made a lot of behavior that's more optimized, that's more resilient to problems, so less error prone. There's a new UI, but it's still kind of, it needs improvement. The UI needs improvement. If you've got UI skills for creating fun front ends, that's something that Selenium team could probably use help with right now. But the Grid's going to be much better, and that's going to be really nice. And there's going to be ways to extend it and all sorts of fun things there. Selenium IDE, again, this ends up in the articles of new for Selenium 4. It's already out there. Nothing's changing from what got released at the beginning of this year. Applitools was working on the development of this, and they've mostly stopped. I think I've heard that Microsoft wants to develop for it, but I don't know the status of that. And I'm not a big fan of Selenium IDE anyway. I think the wrong people end up using it for the wrong reasons, and everyone pretty much in the industry knows my stance on that, so I don't need to say any more about that. So, okay, major changes you probably do care about when you're writing code. We're trying to remove this JSON wire protocol support. So it's still actually going to exist in Java, but all the other languages, we've gotten rid of it. We're no longer doing the handshake. We're only sending W3C code. And so the endpoint needs to be able to recognize that and do something with it. We're removing deprecated methods. The joke here is the Selenium explicitly does not follow semantic versioning. But in this case, we are using the fact that there's a major version update to delete things that have been deprecated for a while. Pluggable locators and relative locators and DevTools, these are still in active development. I'll talk about those here in a second. All right, so some things that are deprecated that you'll want to update in your code. Desired capabilities. At some point, desired capabilities as a whole are going away. Right now, it's just the static methods for the browser when you're calling those on the desired capabilities class. But we really want you to be using the browser options class. Or if you need additional things that aren't browser related, then a mutable capabilities class. So if you need to do something on Sauce Labs, you need to use mutable capabilities, which will allow you to put anything anywhere, kind of like what desired capabilities did. But we want you to use mutable capabilities now because we just want to get rid of all desired capabilities references. The idea in JSON Wire Protocol was there was going to be desired capabilities and required capabilities, and there were going to be different implementations that would work with either, and then grids. It never ended up working out. Pretty much everyone all the bindings pretty much only ever used desired capabilities. And so it was just kind of a bad approach from the beginning that if we had come together in some kind of standardized body to discuss what's good and what's bad, it never would have happened that way. But because it was kind of ad hoc development over the years, we ended up with this desired required capabilities. And now we just want to get rid of it. Browser options classes, Chrome options, Firefox options, etc., or mutable capabilities that allows you to do anything you want in a capabilities class. Classes that are getting deprecated, finds by name and find element by name. These actually aren't typically used by people, but pretty much you can just use the by classes for everything. It's fine. It's pretty easy to change these over. Page factory and expected conditions. .NET is removing both of these. I think Java talked about it, but there's no really easy way for us to pull those out and put it somewhere else without breaking things. Pretty much everyone agrees that page factory is not a good idea. A lot of people see it in the Selenium code and like, page factory, that's what everyone should use because it's official. It was kind of designed to be example code. Here's an example of a page object-like thing that you could do with Selenium. It's inefficient, it has problems, it's pretty much a bad design. So if you're using that, I'm sorry, next time you make a decision as to whether to use that or not, I'd rather you not. Which is why .NET's getting rid of it. Same thing with expected conditions. Ideally, everyone should be using some kind of Lambda or anonymous method if you're in .NET. Ruby and Python have both had this idea from the beginning. There's no class with an expected condition. You just pass in a chunk of code and say, run this over and over again until it's true, until it returns a true value. Then it exits out and it continues. And so it's a lot more flexible than trying to have, we just keep adding, like, we add more and more of these expected conditions methods and they get more and more difficult and frustrating and crazy to work with because again, they're not well optimized. The is clickable makes 3 different wire calls when it really only needs to make 2, but it makes 4 and it only needs 3. Anyway, again, inefficient and not super well thought through, but people asked for them and so they got added. All right, element locators. A couple new things here. There's this idea that Simon has pluggable locators. He actually just landed this in trunk earlier this week, but so I haven't taken a look to see exactly what's going on, but he wants to have some kind of, make it easier to create your own custom locators without jumping through a whole bunch of hoops. I'm guessing this is going to be something like I have a data-test. Instead of IDs, I use data-test everywhere to load my unique locators. How about I have a by data test and just pass in a string rather than having to do a CSS selector with a bunch of extra syntax? I'm guessing something like that. I'm guessing ways to, I think there's some AI generated things we might be able to leverage that for. We'll see what that looks like. I'm not sure also what that's going to look like in other languages, or if this is pretty much just a Java thing and a .NET thing, since .NET pretty much follows whatever Java does. All right, so the one that a lot of people have been excited about is this relative locators. This is locate an element that's near this other element or above this other element or below. So you locate one element and then you try and find, based on what the page looks like, where things are. And so I've got this page. This is the sauce demo site, Swag Labs product page. And I'm just like, all right, well, how about I find one of these things and then click the button to the right of it, or click the button above it. Well, when I write this code, it ends up not actually working. I'm getting the list of elements here, and I'm saying, get me the third one, and then click the thing to the right of it, click the button to the right of the third inventory item, or click the button below the second. And so theoretically, based on that, this one should be clicked, and which one? And the one to the right of the third. So theoretically, this should be clicked and then unclicked. And in this case, it sees this is the one to the right of this element, and this is the one below this element. So it's not ideal. But like any locator, you have to figure out what works and what doesn't. I'm not a huge fan of relative locators because of the fact that they're imprecise, the fact that you could end up with a type 2 error where you think you're clicking the right thing, but something changed and things moved around in the DOM, and you're trying to guess where things are based on. It's just more likely to be brittle, and it's more likely that you might be doing something that you weren't intending to test and getting a passing result, even though the system is not working as intended. So an example of code that actually works, though, Digo, my colleague and fellow Selenium contributor, has this just a bunch of images, and he said to blur or turn off blur based on where they're at. And so this is pretty straightforward. Find an element to the left of Boston, below Warsaw, and then blur it and unblur it. So it does work, but obviously discrete images are a lot easier to deal with than a div that's got some calculations that need to be made. I should also say that I know Simon updated this code relatively recently since the last alpha. And so it's entirely possible that my code for this will actually work with the next release. So ideally, Alpha 7 was the last alpha that we're releasing, and the next version we release is going to be the beta, the first beta. But that means that we need to make sure all of the features are there. We want it to be feature complete, we want all the features to be there, even if they're not complete. DevTools. So this is probably the thing that's coming with Selenium 4 that I'm most excited about. There are a lot of, obviously Cypress is a big deal. I can talk about Cypress for a little bit at least. Puppeteer and Playwright have both become bigger things. A lot of these are dealing with the DevTools protocol through WebSockets and lower level interactions. So rather than HTTP commands that are sent synchronously to a server, it's opening a WebSocket and doing things, creating event listeners and doing things more asynchronously. Some things that you can do with DevTools that you can't do with Selenium directly right now, or in Selenium 3, but these do work in Selenium 4. You can block specific URLs. You can get console logs. You can insert headers, which is a good way to set basic authentication since that was removed. The ability to use basic authentication has mostly gone away since most browsers stopped supporting the username :access key or password at whatever the URL is. The standards body, the W3C, said that's insecure, don't support that, and all of the browsers have mostly said, okay, we won't support that. So a lot of people that have basic authentication in their sites have to find other ways around that. And with Selenium 4, it'll be very easy to do. Geolocation, you can set yourself to wherever you want to be. network interception. This is a really, really powerful, exciting thing where you can essentially say, hey, everything that's a JPEG on the site, don't go load it from wherever on the internet it exists. Load this kitten image instead. And so now all of the images on your page are going to be of this locally stored kitten image, something like that. That's like the stupid, simple, unnecessary example, but this could be entire sites. This is where you can do fun things like pointing to some kind of service virtualization, point to some kind of mock server instead of a real server. Essentially, if you're not testing it, but it needs to have some blob present on the site to work, use some kind of test server instead of the real server. And that's all going to be allowed now with the DevTools. And then setting the user agent, which used to be easier, it's now better supported with the DevTools protocol. So the limitation of the DevTools protocol, it's only supported by Chrome, except for it's also supported by Edge, because Edge is now using Chromium. And Firefox has been, or Mozilla has been putting a lot of energy. They've been trying to work with the Google's DevTools team, the current team in Munich, trying to get the same commands working in Firefox that are working in Chrome to a certain extent. But the DevTools protocol was not very well thought through and not very well, it wasn't written with the idea of this might be a standard. Pretty much everything Selenium has ever done was written with the idea of how does this get extended? How can everyone use it? How do we make this a standard? And DevTools is just like, let's just throw access to everything and not worry about what's leaking out. If anyone else might ever be able to use this, we're going to go fast and break things. And things break. Even Puppeteer things, there are certain things that you would do with it that, and then a next version it breaks, and you have to rewrite your test code to work with those things. So it's a real issue. Selenium is trying to put together with the W3C, we're trying to put together in the W3C a bi-directional protocol, essentially defining a key set of features and attributes that you would use in for DevTools related things that essentially is the same kind of thing as the WebDriver, but for the DevTools, where all of the different browser vendors could implement whatever makes sense for their DevTools protocols, their different implementations, essentially provide an interface so we can do the same things of, sending commands, asynchronously to do all of these different features, and then bubble that back up to Selenium users. So trying to do this standardized, the code that we're writing in Selenium 4 right now is designed to be the first part of putting together that bi-directional standard. And the goal is for Selenium to be able to be the best of both. You get the synchronous HTTP commands that really do a great job of emulating exactly what a user would do cross-platform, and also get all of the newfangled features that people are excited by in these other tools that are Chrome only. And the goal with Selenium is they're Chrome only for now. Some of it's going to work with Firefox. Most of it's going to be able to work with Edge. And then Safari will implement it once we get the protocol figured out. So that's the exciting stuff. I've got examples from all of these at this, and I can publish a PDF of the slides here. So I do have code examples for all of this. I added slides with all of this, but I'm not going to go through each of these. Is there any one that I want to? Not really, but it shows like working with cookies and working with headers and all of the fun stuff that I was talking about. Oh, I'll show this one. This is the kittens, where you replace all of the images on a page with kitten images, and that's whoops. There we go, network request code. So Simon told me, like I showed him my code for all of this. I pretty much found code on the internet and copy pasted it and attributed it in this repository. But some of these make more sense than others and are probably more convoluted than others. Like there's a lot going on with this to intercept and replace. And anyway, Simon told me there were some issues with some of these things. They all work, but there's probably some better ways to format it and he promised to take a look and give me feedback on that here soon. So maybe all of this will get tidied up shortly. But yeah, super excited with some of these things. I guess I will also say, I'll make a plug for the work that some of my colleagues at Sauce Labs have done, because we have supported some of this functionality in Sauce Labs for almost 3 years now. We have custom execute script commands that you can set to get console logs and get HAR files, and to do things like evaluating performance and all of this network intercept stuff. It's just one line of code with a string that has a JSON blob of what you want where, which is pretty slick. But all of that stuff is now going to be native in Selenium 4, and I really am looking forward to seeing what that looks like. So I think I'm just going to stop there and go to questions if people have questions.
Yeah, I'll ask one. So, for guides on upgrading to Selenium 4, I'm just curious if there's like any suggestions or anything you can offer there.
So it really should just be change the version number and go. Like, I think Python now, to get the asynchronous libraries that you need, requires you to upgrade to Python 3. So no complaining, you people still on Python 2. You need it in order to do the DevTools functionality. So Python 3 it is. And then Ruby's upgraded the version. So you upgrade your version and everything else should be completely backward compatible. Really the biggest sticking point is for service providers like Sauce Labs, because Selenium did a great job of maintaining backward compatibility if all you care about are browser options and W3C options, but it's a lot harder to deal with other vendor provided options. And so, the service provider will require users to do more work in their capabilities code. But other than that, you're probably better, like I said, the W3C portion all exists in the latest version of Selenium 3. So if things are working with Selenium 3 and you're getting a W3C syntax result back, and maybe, you can see that from, let me find the slide to point this out, but you can see that you're getting a W3C syntax back. It should, there we go. Selenium detected W3C dialect. This should show up if you're getting, if you're using W3C. So make sure that if you're using W3C, then really the upgrade should just be update the version and recompile. So that's another thing. I think I highly encourage people to try out the latest alpha, because pretty much all of the behavior that you're using in the latest version of Selenium 3 should just work with the latest alpha. The only things that we're changing with the alpha going forward are some of this new functionality with the locators and the dev tools. And I think we still have some stuff to do with the grid, but if you're not using the grid, it should all just work fine.
Cool. And just another one. I mean, this is more of a very opinionated answer question. However, you, Bazel. So what was the choice behind using Bazel?
So in the early days, we had this system called, we built our own build tool, because Simon's got very particular ideas on what a build tool should do. Build tool should be able to be run from any operating system, and the result of it being run from any operating system should be the exact, you should be able to hash it the exact same way, get the exact same file on it for building it from any operating system. It has to work for all of the different languages. It has to, Simon doesn't like downloading dependencies. Like, all of the dependencies that we use are packaged into the repository itself, which is why the Selenium repo is like 5 gigabytes now. Yeah, so there's all of these things that he has. And so we built this build system. We called it Crazy Fun because, well, someone else named it. They named it before I got there, but it was named Crazy Fun because it was crazy and fun. And yeah, it was essentially a command line wrapper of a custom built JRuby jar that would then call out to with rake tasks to execute other things. And so it was kind of a custom mess. And Simon went and worked at, he went to work for Facebook, and he was working on the Buck build tool at Facebook. And he worked there for a couple of years and did all of that and tried to put all of his theories on how everything should work into that project. Once he left Facebook, so we implemented Buck in Selenium, and Selenium was kind of the trial project for a lot of the functionality that was going into that build tool as it was being developed. But when Simon left, we weren't getting as much support from Facebook anymore. Like there wasn't, like we had our own fork that was doing a bunch of custom stuff. Buck's not as widely used in the industry. And then Basil added better support. I think it was Windows support that it was, no, it wasn't. There was something that Basil was really struggling to work with until relatively recently, and then it became good enough for us to work with, and now we've mostly moved everything over to Basil. I think Ruby is actually still the holdout because the Ruby library with Basil is still not ideal, but that'll happen soon.
Cool, very cool. Yeah, I was curious on that because I think the Kubernetes project kind of swayed away from Basil. But yeah, it's super interesting stuff, and that's an interesting history as well. I guess the only other question that I have, well, there's a few, but is really with the you mentioned, contributing and getting additional contributors in place. I did notice in the Kubernetes repository that there are like issues tagged with like, good for new contributors and these kinds of things. Is that possible in the?
We have some of those. We do have some of those. I forget what the tag name is. I think it's like we had those like 5-10 years ago. We had some of those tags saying easy or something like that. The problem is we don't always tag them when we see them. A lot of the times we see the problem, we'll just, if it's easy, we'll just fix it. And in some of those we do try to have like the, Simon teaches the fix a bug, become a committer. Simon and Jim have both taught that. And so we get everyone in a room for a day before Selenium conference and get everyone to download Selenium and do a full build and get everything to get their system all working, and then try and find a bug that's easy enough to work with and do that. And so we've been mostly successful finding things that people can fix and commit at any given time. So I'm assuming that there are a handful of things out there, but yeah, and that's honestly the best way I have found to working with an open source project is like running the tests, finding bugs, running tests for it, seeing what's broken, and then kind of exploring from there. Yeah, anyway, I could ramble on some more, but there should be some,
awesome.
Probably not as much as there should be. And it is a little frustrating that the barrier of entry for contributing to Selenium is unfortunately higher than we'd all like it to be. And we're all trying to make that better, because we haven't had a lot of new contributors in a number of years. And Simon is planning on leaving the project after Selenium 4 is released, and maybe some other people. So, we do want to encourage people to use the product and contribute back to it. So
awesome. No, yeah, and it's interesting because I remember some of those, fix a bug. Oh, I thought those events were fantastic. Those were really, really smart to do those. So yeah, on that note, I did see that Joe Colantonio episode of Simon's planned departure. Now, is there like plans for, like, I guess, I don't know how the organization works of Selenium itself, but like the head, like a lead and these kinds of things?
No, so yeah, so we've actually put a lot of work into this, preparing for this. Diego actually spearheaded a lot of this. I keep referencing him, but we essentially have a project leadership committee and a technical leadership committee. So there's two different committees that have different members that have different essentially tasks, different focuses. And so the TLC has to be made up of people that have done a significant number of contributions and can kind of provide input on the technical direction. And then the PLC is designed to interface with Software Freedom Conservancy and some of the legal issues and things like that. And I think we've got it. And right now, Simon's the lead of both, right? So he's been the lead of this since he started WebDriver back in 2006 or 5 or whenever he started this. And so he's been doing it for a long time, and we're finally looking to how do we as a team, as a group, make decisions going forward that isn't just based on the next cool thing Simon has in his head. And he's a pretty brilliant man. So there's been a lot of really great things that have come out of that, and we're gonna have to follow that up with more conversations and hopefully guided. Oh, and that's another thing. Like we do have on our Slack channel, we do have a Selenium TLC channel. So in our Slack org for Selenium, there is a channel, and we have meetings every couple of weeks that are public that people can, attend and get the updates on where are we at with things and what are we working on and where things are going. So we're doing those things already in preparation.
Is there a link for that? Something
Awesome.
you can post in chat?
Sure.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So there's selenium.dev, and we're looking for get involved, and I'm looking for, where is Slack? Now I can't find the Slack channel. Support. There we go, chat room and Slack. There we go. Let me make sure that that's not broken. Nope, that works. All right, now I need to find the chat.
Cool, thank you. And then, yeah, for everyone else, if you have questions, this is your time to, not only questions, but just conversation. Pretty much anything you want to talk about.
I guess I should post that that's coming from, well, there we go. So I should say that's all coming from so we do have kind of a new website from the past couple of years. Selenium.dev now is our website, and more seleniumhq.org. And lots of cool features on there, and we're working on improving all of that as well.
Very cool.
So who else has questions so that Evan's not hogging everything?
I have
Exactly.
a question, if you don't mind. Has there been any kind of changes into the threading model of the Selenium library? If you are, of course, using this library, how you should interface with it from if you have a multi-threaded application, or is it still pretty much the same?
So Simon has done a lot of work for the grid to improve how that's working, essentially making it more. And again, I'm not a threading expert or a Java expert, but I know that he's put a lot of work making that more modular and robust and performant from that respect. From just the Java code perspective, it's the threading. So yeah, like pretty much the Java from the just Selenium side, the Java side, this is where, like, working at Sauce Labs, where we want people to run their tests in parallel, and so run things in multiple threads. This is where you need something like Surefire plugin to be able to execute things in parallel for Maven Surefire plugin. TestNG runs things in parallel, but TestNG has very particular ideas and opinions on how things need to work, and it pretty much forces you to use thread local for everything because of how it shares classes between the parallelized sessions. So when I hear people concerned about threading, it's usually a TestNG issue in Java. It's usually a TestNG issue, not a Selenium issue.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, who else? What didn't I cover that people wanted to know about? Any burning questions?
If nobody's asking, one more question I wanted to ask is there anything that you know that is like faster, better, more reliable that you can talk about in Selenium 4 versus 3? What in that context as well?
something that's faster and more reliable.
Are there any kind of speed improvement, performance enhancements in 4 versus 3 that you can think of?
Yeah, no, by and large, the bindings, everything that's available in Selenium 4 was part of the last version of Selenium 3. So everything that was all of the W3C standard things that, you know, like there's no underlying performance changes for any of those commands because they're pretty much all the same. To be honest, it probably didn't need to be a 2-year release cycle for some of these things. If we could have done some smaller iterations on some of these things, but we're trying to make sure all of the stuff is there. So it's like, let's get the build system done. Let's overhaul the grid. Let's do all of these things, as well as removing the JSON wire protocol support. So yeah, there's really nothing that is a fundamental change to the performance, I guess. And I mean, this isn't really going to be a performance, but there is going to be additional functionality and different things that you can do with the DevTools libraries. And I'm honestly not sure the performance for that. Like, one of the things that's a big deal with Selenium relative to a lot of the alternatives is its ability to be able to run on remote machines. Pretty much all of the other DevTools framework solutions that are out there, the code has to be on the same machine as the browser. The browser has to be opened external to the framework, and then the framework can do what it needs to do on the local machine. Selenium is designed to be able to be run on a separate machine, and that's why I'm excited with all of these additional features. They're going to be able to execute against another machine, not just locally.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you very much, for taking the time to do this, and thank you everyone once again, just because they either worked all day or, whatever they did all day, to take the time out and, to hang out with all of us is really, really cool. So it's always appreciated.